We shall begin this module by discussing in brief about the environmental economics. Environmental economics traditionally has been part of microeconomics. Various problems and issues such as effects of pollution on human health, ecology and environment, optimization of resource use, policies to control pollution have been analyzed using microeconomic models. However, in recent years, economists use macroeconomic models to evaluate performance of environment and ecology because there is a link between macroeconomic indicators and environmental policy. A specific relationship between macroeconomic policies and environmental resource degradation, focusing particularly on factors leading to deviation from market efficiency, were analyzed by Dasgupta and Miller in 1996 and Peirce in 1996. It is clearly known that markets can neither tell us about the desirable distribution of ownership of non-market environmental resources, nor it can allocate them efficiently, that is, how much clean air, clean water, healthy wetland or healthy forest we should have, or what level of risk is acceptable when the welfare of future generation is at stake. Those studies have provided important feedback and evidence about the environmental regulatory policies and cost benefit. There is a need to include the matter of equitable distribution and to redesign the national accounting system for a sustainable development. For example, in US, air quality regulations cost the manufacturing industry roughly $21 billion per year, about 8.8% of profits. The second prospective report conducted by the Environmental Protection Agency estimates that the direct benefits from the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments are $2 trillion for the year 2020 or 9% of GDP. But to analyze benefits at the aggregate level and to include wider goals into policy formulation, there is need to understand macroeconomic policies and their linkages with environment and ecology in detail. But to analyze benefits at the aggregate level and to include wider goals into policy formulation, there is need to understand macroeconomic policies and their linkages with environment and ecology in detail. We start with a brief description of structural adjustment programs and then analyze possible linkages between structural adjustment policies and environmental management. After reading this module, you will be able to learn about the linkages between macroeconomic policies and environment, structural adjustment programs and their impacts on environmental resources, empirical researches providing evidence for SAP's implementation and impact of these policies on environment, sustainable development and the goals of sectoral and macroeconomic policies, importance of second best policies, requirement of ISLM models modification, action impact matrix and improvement in the conventional system of national accounts to achieve the sustainable development. Let us discuss about the structural adjustment programs. Structural adjustment programs were implemented by the IMF and World Bank during 1980s as a corrective measures in most developing countries which were passing through major financial crisis. The objective was to address macroeconomic as well as microeconomic or sectoral issues and to reformulate the existing policies to improve the economic and financial conditions of these countries. SAPs included trade liberalization policies, that is, dismantling import, export taxes and trade controls, domestic pricing policies, that is, taxes, subsidies and price controls, institutional reforms, that is, land, financial, marketing, research, extension, and investment policies, that is, public infrastructure, technology, training. The areas of policy instruments to achieve these ends were varied and country specific. More specifically, SAPs focused on A. Macroeconomic stabilization, B. Foreign trade liberalization, C. Public sector privatization, D. Domestic deregulation of investment production and prices, E. Financial sector reforms, F. Tax reforms, G. Labor market reforms, H. Social safety net. All of these policies were interrelated in the sense that the effectiveness of each policy measure was dependent upon the other measures were being successfully implemented. This interrelationship raised several issues about the design of the program. The structure of SAPs was such that countries were provided conditional finance to developing and emerging countries to achieve macroeconomic stability in the short term and structural change in the long term. Short-term stabilization programs aimed at having a change in the composition of aggregate demand, and long-term programs aimed at relaxing the supply side constraints in the economy. The policy instruments used to achieve the short-term goal were fiscal, that is, government expenditure, taxes and subsidies; monetary, that is, money supply, credit and interest rates; and exchange rate policies, that is, devaluation, terms of trade, balance of payment. However, the balance of payment stabilization program could also be implemented to address any immediate crisis on the external account in the short term. SAP's policies aimed at increasing output by utilizing the existing capacity on one hand and the growth rate by assigning a greater role to prices, markets and the private sector on the other hand. The key elements of SAPs were price reforms to realign domestic and world prices and supportive structural reforms designed to improve the responsiveness of the supply side of the economy. Restructuring programs helped reformulating overall policies which yielded mixed results for different countries in areas such as agriculture, forestry, trade, wildlife and urban environment, though it also put pressure on environmental resources. SAP's development process did not include any measure to protect environmental resources. Next, we shall discuss about the structural adjustment programs and environment. There are many criticisms faced by the IMF and World Bank about the formulation of structural programs, as the environmental concerns were yet to be incorporated into the design of policy-based lending structure. Financial support extended under SAPs encouraged countries to mine their natural resource base in an unsustainable way. Studies have shown statistical linkage between external indebtedness and unsustainable resource management. To address the possible linkages between its policies and environmental degradation, the IMF concluded that sound macroeconomic policies and economic stabilization were essential to alleviate poverty and protect the environment. The linkages between macroeconomic policy and the environment, which run in both directions, are complex and cannot be generalized. They were required to differ from case to case. Analyzing the linkages between macroeconomic policy and the environment required a great deal of information that was not readily available. The IMF should help its members minimizing the damaging environmental impact, since poverty and the environment are linked in that the poor are more likely to resort to activities that can degrade the environment. Subsidies that have negative distributional and environmental efforts should be eliminated. Environmental taxes and resource user charges could be a useful instrument in some adjustment programs. The exchange rate was a blunt instrument for dealing with market and institutional failures, which were often at the root of environmental problems. Good governance that was sensitive and committed to the twin aims of macroeconomic stability and environmental protection was critical. Poverty alleviation was then undertaken as a stated purpose of adjustment programs. Now we will move on to discuss the literature survey macroeconomy environment linkages. Many studies have analyzed the linkage between environment and macroeconomic policies. Empirical evidence revealed that financial market reforms, by increasing the availability of credit, enabled the farmers to expand and intensify land cultivation and switch to environmentally benign crops. Grossman and Kruger in 1995 analyzed the existence of U-shaped Kuznets curve, which shows a relationship between per capita income and various indicators of water and air pollution. They argued that it was clear that the environmental quality declines with the increase in per capita income at the initial levels of growth, but it was not clear that continued growth reverses the trend, as the relationship varied widely by country and the type of environmental degradation. Impacts of pricing reforms in energy sector in Sri Lanka were reported to be positive, as there was a shift from dirty fuel to electricity causing a fall in air pollution. However, the public sector reforms policies which advocated reductions in public expenditure adversely affected the urban environment. Riddle in 1997 argued that in journal SAPs impoverished human life in African cities by increasing the cost of living, reducing wages, social services and housing, and decreasing employment facilities. It was suggested therefore that country-specific SAP policies should be designed for better outcomes, as the effects of SAPs were different in different countries. It was further argued that complementary environmental policies could be undertaken to counteract any adverse impacts of growth-oriented macroeconomic policies as a short-run remedy and more integrated approach as a long-run solution. Moving on to discuss about the sustainable development. The World Commission on Environment and Development WCED in 1987 defined sustainable development as the development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It implies both weak and strong perspectives of sustainability. Weak sustainability perspective suggests that the value of present stock of natural capital should be maintained intact so that future generations will have access to a stock of capital which is of at least the same value as that for the present generation. It advocates, for example, that forests can be cut but should be replenished by plantations. This concept is criticized on the grounds that since economic valuation does not reflect the full value of ecological services, therefore it ignores ecological limits and encourages full exploitation of a natural resource. A strong sustainability perspective suggests that natural systems should be maintained intact wherever possible, particularly the critical natural capital such as water supplies and land fertility. The degraded land may be compensated with extra fertilizer. The strong version of sustainability criterion implies that economic activities which depend heavily on natural resources, energy, raw material, cannot grow indefinitely and therefore limit the scale of macroeconomic activities, that is, use of overall resources and production of output. Macroeconomic policies ultimately aim at reaching a steady state in terms of material and energy consumption in the long run. Among many subsequent definitions, the Sustainable Development Triangle proposed by Monasinghe at the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992 is the most widely accepted, a comprehensive concept of sustainability. It includes three major elements, that is, economic, social and environmental, for having a sustainable development. According to this concept, the sustainable development is a process for improving the range of opportunities to enable individuals and communities to meet their needs as well as to achieve their aspirations and full potential over a sustained period of time, while maintaining the resilience of economic, social and environmental systems. The goal is to make development more sustainable by using resources at a lower intensity today and leaving behind for future generations an undiminished stock of productive assets, that is manufactured, natural and social capital. This will help improving the quality of life of both present and future generations. Sectoral policies and sustainable development. Sectoral policies are formulated to address sector-specific issues relating to demand, resources, inputs and outputs, problems and opportunities within the economy. The goals of these policies are to contribute towards achieving sustainable development by determining investment priorities and providing a base for the formulation and implementation of macroeconomic policies. The most important sectoral policy is the pricing of the resources within the sector, such as fisheries, mining, timber, water and so on. For the sustainable development of a particular sector, the price policy should be such that it includes the private cost of production as well as the cost of externalities generated by the sector. Macroeconomic goals and environment. The objectives of macroeconomic policy should be to have economic stabilization along with distributional equity and also to include broad social goals such as income security, education and universal health care, and the management of economic growth for achieving environmental sustainability. But there is nothing in standard economics which guarantees that economic growth will be either equitable or environmentally benign. Moreover, to fulfill the basic needs of consumption of food, housing, and other goods for the large numbers of people in the world, some kind of economic growth is essential. Specific policies for sustainable development are therefore needed. In this regard, Delhi HE in 1991 suggests that growth should be limited to a sustainable economic scale rather than to an exponential growth scale. The idea is to provide a theoretical basis for the reorientation of macro policy at the national and international levels, linking efforts to promote local level sustainability and equity with greening and restructuring of multilateral institutions. Anthony Hayes suggests that the traditional ISLM model can be extended by including environmental constraints as ISLMEE. Let us discuss about the ISLM model and environment. Conventional ISLM macroeconomic analysis may be extended to incorporate environmental variables and then analyze changes in the stock of environmental assets over time. IS and LM curves will shift to restore any deviations in equilibrium depending on the type of monetary or fiscal, that is expansionary or contractionary policies are required to be adopted in an economy. For example, government spending may be needed for greater recycling of materials and use of renewable energy, and therefore to minimize waste of output. Efficient transportation systems which replace energy intensive automotive transport with high speed trains, public transit, greater use of bicycles, and redesign of cities and suburbs to minimize transportation needs. Effects of fiscal policy: taxes and subsidies, domestic investment, including infrastructural investment, affecting cost of resource extraction and environmentally degrading activities, cleanup and other environmental equipment, and the inclination to invest in projects that have long run versus short run consequences. Effects of monetary policy: monetary policy with a focus on exchange rate regime and also the domestic interest rate would affect the functioning of the financial sector, including control and regulation of credit and financial markets, the degree to which foreign direct investment and foreign ownership are encouraged and regulated. The implications of financial crisis and disasters with major impact on GDP, employment, and balance of payments, and policy responses to crisis. Thus, the macroeconomic policies should take into account the environmental concerns along with economic growth at a sustainable scale. This adds a new dimension to macroeconomic policy, which is important for both developed and developing economies in the 21st century. Now, we shall understand the second best policies. Mailer and Monasinghe in 1996 developed an analytical framework to explore possible unforeseen negative environmental effects of macroeconomic policies. Their model finds that it is the combination of macroeconomic policies and subsidiary imperfections, that is, policy, market, or institutional, that leads to environmental degradation. These imperfections may not be noticed in a stagnant economy, but as economic growth is induced by policy reforms, environmental damage may rapidly worsen. The first best remedy would be to eliminate these subsidiary imperfections without changing macroeconomic policy. If constraints prevent or delay the correction of imperfections, then a second best situation is to modify macroeconomic policies to achieve environmental and social gains. The complementary macroeconomic policies may include a. Shifting the tax burden from income and capital to the use of fossil fuels and resources, that is, imposition of green taxes. It may reduce the consumption of energy and material intensive economic activities and encourage labor intensive economic activities. B. Elimination of agricultural and energy subsidies to discourage the overuse of energy, fertilizer, pesticides, and irrigation water. Agricultural systems would be sustainable if it adopts the practice of recycling of nutrients, minimizing the use of artificial chemicals and fertilizer, crop diversification, and the use of natural pest controls. These systems also tend to be more labor intensive. Another important topic for discussion is Action Impact Matrix by Monosinghe provides an integrated view for the development decisions by focusing on A. Identifying critical linkage between environment and macroeconomic policies, B. Focusing on valuation or other methods of monetizing important impacts of macroeconomic policies on environmental resources, and C. Suggesting actions priorities. Aim-based process offers to prioritize linkages between policies and their sustainability impacts. For example, currency devaluation to improve balance of payment would increase timber export but also lead to deforestation to open excess forests. The solution may be to adopt complementary policies to strengthen property rights and restrict access to forest areas. In the next stage, a more detailed aim is prepared to analyze economy-wide linkages between policy and environmental impacts. For multi-sector analysis, computable general equilibrium model is used by incorporating social and environmental variables. Thus, AIM clearly identifies the issues and offers a systematic coordination of policies for achieving the goal of sustainable development. Lastly, we will discuss about the system of national accounts. To include objectives of sustainable development in macroeconomic analysis, it is essential to extend the conventional SNA to new measures of environment and social concerns. The improved SNA must incorporate the income distributional objectives, non-market activities like depletion of natural resources, and environmental impacts. To standardize the accounting approaches, United Nations has developed an integrated system of environmental and economic accounting without modifying the conventional SNA. It adds a satellite account to the conventional SNA. Based on the available data, it presents different linkages between economic activities and environmental impacts, physical and monetary accounting, and valuation of environmental costs. If SNA takes into account the values of all man-made and natural capital, the resulting per capita wealth would be a useful indicator of economic welfare. Let us now summarize what we have learned in this module. After ruling for a very long period of time now, in recent years, it is being realized that macroeconomic models are to be improved to incorporate environmental concerns. From just having continuous economic growth, macroeconomic policies may be reformulated to incorporate social goals, and models may be readjusted to include environmental effects to having sustainable growth. Green accounting system, that is modified SNA, has already been developed to identify the costs of degradation of natural resources, though the valuation of environmental resources is still a challenging task. AIM provides a systematic process of identifying important economy-environment linkages, which help prioritizing policy actions to limit environment and social harm. The sustainability triangle encompasses three crucial variables: economic, social, and environment, to achieve both intra and intergenerational growth, which would fulfill the basic needs of poor while maintaining resilience of ecosystem. However, this is possible only when imperfections of policy, markets, and institutions which exist in an economy are tackled by evolving the second best macroeconomic policies.